York City, there's something called the Encores series, where for about 25 years now, they've been dusting off mostly old musicals and giving them 5 or 6 performances with a full orchestra and semi-mounting. And, most of these have no business as Broadway productions, but you want to take a look at this thing from 1956 for a little while. And it's, a delight. There's a close circle of people who watch these. Well, 2020 got it. And so in this season, among other things, they took one older show and there's a very vocal, gay, Black of a certain age actor and singer named Billy Porter. And it's funny, I, by chance, have sat in restaurants near him twice, just by chance. And he is very, very intelligent and frankly, very fond of hearing himself talk. And he's got certain ideas. I mean, he's kind of like a real life version of the character Belize in Angels in America, although there's nothing about gender fluidity or anything about him. He's a gay Black man.
This by overhearing restaurant conversations?
I do. I could do an imitation of him. He's wonderful to listen to, but turns out they let him get his hands on this musical and he decides to make it into a vehicle of preaching about social justice. He was allowed to literally rewrite the whole thing. All of the music was rearranged to sound kind of R&B instead of like Broadway. And frankly, it wasn't The Life, which is what the musical was called, from the 90s. It wasn't that show. And it was also a complete, pretentious, preachy fucking mess. Now, Billy Porter's a great guy, and he has some interesting things to say. He's a great performer. Some of you will have seen him as the lead in Kinky Boots. But what he did to this musical was a travesty. Anybody could have seen it, and yet nobody could have called him out on it. And what worries me, and it was roundly criticized, but what worries me is that there's nothing stopping that sort of thing happening again and again. Nobody would have said, Billy, why don't you take a part in it? Or we'll let you, do a Black musical from 2009 where there were already people in it who are a lot like you. But Billy, you can't have this. We're not going to do this because this doesn't sound like a quality project. Nobody would say that these days. And even though The Life was a complete catastrophe, I'm sure that other things like that will come up because you're not supposed to act on the fact that it wasn't good. You're supposed to think, well, we should try again or something like that. But Glenn, I want to ask you something. People often say to me that the kinds of people who are pulling this sort of thing, we see you white theater, or the kind of Black student protester that we both know, that they're doing it because they're insecure, that they're insecure about their performance. It's a way of detracting from the fact that they don't feel like they're the equal of the other students. Whenever anybody's asked me about that, I always say, I don't know. I always say that I understand where you're coming from, but I can't say that that's what it is. But, watching this sort of thing gets so frustrating, like with this theater stuff, that I can't help wondering whether that's what it is. And I was thinking the other day, I have never known a Black undergraduate of those politics who, and it's important for everybody to realize that it's not all Black students who are like that. Those are just the people who wind up in the media. I have never known a Black undergraduate of those politics who was a tippy top student. Put it that way. If the Black student feels that way, they are not making A pluses. I have never known a Black student who was making A pluses who engaged in that sort of thing. Now, they might pay some lip service. And in my experience, that Black student who's making A pluses is not, as they used to call me sometimes, whiteified. I've known some extremely Black identified students like that who were making A pluses, and some of them were Black American, not Caribbean or African. But if you were performing at the same level as all the white kids, you are not out on the steps yelling at some white administrator. I have never seen it. And it's not because they're too busy. It's because I think it's that they are sure of themselves. Have you ever known that type who was also not just smart, but a tippy top student? Just a question.
I have a name in mind. I don't want to mention it because I don't want to embarrass him. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He studied with a top philosopher at Cambridge in the UK when he went over there for his Rhodes Scholarship. He was a joint Econ Africana Studies major at Brown.
And he fell into pretending that Brown was a racist institution.
In Africana. No. I'm naming somebody who is right in the sweet spot of what you were describing, which is to say an absolute tip-toppy student who was not. He was not one of these stand on the steps. he was every bit as woke. I mean, in terms of his politics, every bit as progressive, but he was not dismissive of the canon. He was not contemptuous of the norms of what constituted excellence. You know, he wasn't trying to remake the thing from scratch. He was trying to master the techniques of economics and the philosophical concepts on behalf of his serious commitment to trying to make the world a better place. And he was sure of himself. He knew that he was as good as anybody walking along because he was doing both a humanistic program in terms of philosophy and social study in Africana, and a technocratic program in terms of analytical economics and whatnot. And he's distinguished in my mind as a student of color who was also a sharply progressive political thinker.
Exactly.
By his excellence, which I think did allow him to feel secure and not have him engaging in this dismissive activity where they want to rewrite everything from scratch. You know, you're telling me this is, you know, these are a bunch of dead white men. I don't have to read these books, kind of thing like that. No, I think there's something to what you say. If you're secure in your ability to function at a high level within the specialized enterprise that you're engaged in, you will be more inclined, if there are doubts about your ability or if there are questions, to dispel them through performance than to dismiss them through a kind of subversive, you know, let's redo the whole thing. I don't trust the powers that be, et cetera, attitude, which is what I think fuels this irreverence and a lack of deference in the evaluation process. You know, I don't know what you think makes for a good show. I don't know why your judgment about this guy's revision of a play from an earlier era was bad, but I'm sure he would reject the criteria that you used to make that assessment.
Yeah, the sorts of people who you can imagine thought that people who didn't like the show just didn't like that racism was being addressed, or that they didn't like the idea of a Black person telling the story their way. That's the idea. The notion that there really might have been a problem of quality with the thing as a dramatic product, which there was, is considered completely off the table. That could possibly be it. We just have to question what these white standards are. But I want to be clear that I'm saying that it's not that only Black students have these insecurities. It's not that only Black students are less than A+. At the same school, there are white students who are less than A+, you know, maybe sure, B+, and who are insecure. Very common, especially at a top school where the grand theme is all of us were valedictorians, and then you get here and you realize you're not the smartest person. That's not a race. Right. But the thing is, if you are a white kid in that position, there are other things available to you to do to have a sense of something to grab onto to assuage your insecurities. It could be any number of things. You could become a stoner, you know, all sorts of things. Something available to a Black kid is to pretend that it's a racist institution, because then all questions as to whether you're going to be an excellent student are tabled because you're dealing with all of this racism, and so you can't be bothered. So it's something that the culture makes available to a brown student. But I'm beginning to think that that really might be part of what's going on. You think of Ketanji Brown Jackson. One of my favorite aspects of her biography is that she engaged in some of that, but put a brake on it to the point that it would have interfered with schoolwork. And look how far she got. You know, she's the kind that I like in that way. But there's another kind of student who just ODs on it. And what we're supposed to think is because they are uniquely committed to the racism. But the thing is, at that school, there isn't enough racism to explain this degree of anger. In the theater, there isn't enough racism to explain that degree of anger. And so I just find myself thinking, with these truly performative people in this theatrical production I'm thinking about, are they insecure about their chops? And so they feel better about being where they are by pretending to be victims of discrimination? And if so, it's so modern, and it's such a shame how much acting, this is as if I'm trying to make some grand theme, but how much acting we put up with in our culture in the name of that sort of thing. And, you know, with good, sensitive, smart white people walking around pretending to think that these things are worth chewing on, or to tell you the truth, I think a lot of them really do, especially lately. They're thinking, well, it must really be that bad. But based on what you and I are in a position to see is performance in not just the occasional case, but frankly, when it comes to these things, most of it. And here we are.